Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn live event in which we will shortly be outlining trade strategies for navigating the seismic tariffs introduced by the Trump administration. We will be starting properly in a few moments' time at 1, but in the meantime, we'd love to hear from you about your experiences of today's big topics, which is, of course, tariffs. Throughout today's event, we will be encouraging you to write in about your experiences of the Trump trade war. So in the comments, let us know who you are and what business or industry you're from, the impact you're anticipating Trump's tariffs having on your business and supply chains, and how you are looking to mitigate these impacts. So we will start properly at 1. So you've got a few seconds now to type in who you are, the impact you're anticipating from tariffs, and how you're looking to mitigate those impacts. So I'll give you a few seconds before we start properly. Great to see so many people joining the call already. Obviously, a lot of interest in today's topic, unsurprisingly, such an important event we'll be talking about shortly. In fact, let's get going. It's 1 o'clock. So good afternoon, everyone. Great to see so many of you with us on today's LinkedIn Live event in which we are looking at trade strategies for navigating the tariffs introduced by the Trump administration. My name is William Barnes-Graham, the Executive Editor at the Chartered Institute of Export and International Trade, and I will be your host today. For those that don't know about us, the Chartered Institute was established in 1935 with the mission of empowering global trade. We do this through our advisory services, connecting your business with experts for bespoke strategic advice, by helping you build the trade leaders of tomorrow with training and qualifications in customs and international trade, and last but certainly not least, membership, offering exclusive events and resources to our members, including a new Tariff Navigator toolkit of guides around tariffs, which we've launched today. In this webinar, we will offer a top-level view of tariffs, but if you want in-depth strategic detail, scan the QR code on screen or follow the links being shared in the comments to explore our offerings. And for those of you who are joining just now, we're really keen to hear from you about your experiences so far with the Trump administration's tariffs. So do write in the comments, let us know who you are and what business or sector you're from, what impact you're anticipating from the trade war on your business and supply chain, and what you're doing to mitigate this impact. In fact, terrific to see already Peter has written in of ITP Limited. They have one significant customer in the US who will start to have to pay 10% tariffs on our products. Thank you, Peter, for writing in. Do encourage more to write in. Hopefully today's webinar is useful for people like you, Peter, and also Richard, who says he's looking forward to the update and how it will affect clients. Now, there's a lot to get through today. So I'm delighted to be joined first by our Senior International Trade Legislation Advisor, Garima Srivastava. Good afternoon, Garima. To begin with, I'm going to assume... Hi, Garima. To begin with, I'm going to assume that it is, for want of a better word, a baseline in knowledge among the audience today. So we're assuming that you have an understanding of that Trump has introduced significant new reciprocal tariffs on a range of nations, including the UK. Although there has been a bit of a retreat in recent days with some of the higher tariffs suspended, there's nonetheless been a landmark change in global trade, which I'm pretty sure you should be aware of by now. Garima, as a brief recap, just how seismic are these tariffs?
They are pretty significant because we're not just talking about a few percentage points here or there. Some tariffs can actually go up to 25% or more, and that can really throw off a business's costings and margins. For many firms, especially in sectors like automotive, electronics, and steel, it's not just a financial hit that we're talking about, it's strategic. And it forces them to rethink their entire supply chain. So yes, the ripple effect is real. We're seeing its impact in sourcing decisions, pricing, and even market access.
Thank you, Garima, and some information there about the impact so far on screen. Now, Garima, you've been at the coalface supporting several of the businesses that have been calling on the Institute for navigating tariffs. In particular, you've been doing this on our international trade surgeries, which, for those that don't know, these are essentially 2-hour-long calls where business can get bespoke advice from experts like Garima on their ongoing trade challenges. This is unsurprisingly a service that's been in quite high demand recently. Garima, what are the most common issues you've been seeing on these surgeries?
Honestly, classification and origin are the big ones. A lot of businesses are realizing that tariff they pay can entirely depend on how something's classified or where it's considered to originate from. And those decisions aren't always straightforward. We've also had clients tripping up on valuation, for instance, especially when related parties or non standard payments are involved. Sometimes they don't even know a tariff applies until they've been hit with one. So the most common issue is not having the right intel upfront and then scrambling after the fact. And here I would also want to discuss the present impact that we are seeing of the US tariffs. So could we get to the slide, please? The previous one on the impact. All right. So, yeah, let's talk about what's actually happening with these new US tariffs and what they mean for UK businesses. So, starting with the big picture, the US has introduced what they call reciprocal tariffs. Essentially, this is their way of saying if you're going to tax us, we'll tax you back. And the UK is now on the receiving end of some pretty substantial increases in import duties. First up, April 5th, 2025, there's going to be a baseline 10% tariff on most UK origin goods entering the US. Now, that's a blanket rate, which means that even everyday items that weren't heavily taxed before are now facing a 10% bump at the US border. And that alone can make a huge difference to pricing and competitiveness, especially in sectors like consumer goods or electronics. On top of that, we all know steel and aluminum are facing even steeper tariffs, 25%, which were imposed back in March. Now, this isn't new for UK exporters in the metal sector. They have been dealing with this back and forth since the Trump era, and it does not mean that UK origin steel is now significantly more expensive for US buyers. So yeah, it's going to be more expensive. It does mean that the UK origin steel is hit, and this pushes UK businesses to source from other places, or even US buyers to look for other options which are cheaper. Then we've got automobiles and parts, a huge one here as well. From April 3rd, there's a 25% tariff on passenger vehicles and light trucks. And the tariffs on auto parts kick in just a month later on May 3rd. Now, that's a big blow to UK automotive exporters. Think about companies sending over electric vehicle components, gearboxes, or even fully assembled vehicles. These aren't low margin goods for sure, but even they are struggling to absorb that level of extra cost. And lastly, there's a selective approach to some critical products, for instance, semiconductors, minerals, energy related goods, which are currently exempt. But the US is trying to protect its access to high tech and strategic inputs through these exemptions, and which is why they've carved out these exemptions. But remember, the exemption list is narrow, and most UK exporters won't fall under it. Now, let's look at what this actually means in practice for UK businesses. So, first, and the most obvious one, these tariffs raise the cost of doing business with the US. So, if you're selling into the US market, your goods just became more expensive overnight. And that hits your profit margins hard, especially if you've locked in pricing with your buyers. Secondly, tariffs do create a sense of uncertainty and complexity. Businesses have to constantly monitor changes, update pricing models, and revisit their logistics plan. There's more red tape, more documentation, and often more delays at customs. And certainly, flagship industries like automotive and whiskey are particularly exposed. Now, these are the sectors where UK has been traditionally so strong. But the new tariffs are making it harder to compete with the US based or lower tariff foreign suppliers. And finally, of course, there's been a shift in mindset. So businesses are now focusing more on cost management, cash flow planning, and even debt reduction because the trade environment feels more unstable now. For many, it's less about growth right now, honestly, and more about weathering the storm.
Thank you, Garima. Really, yeah, it's a difficult time at the moment, isn't it, for sure? But you mentioned at the start a few customs compliance issues about getting, I guess, the right tariffs or knowing your exposure to it correct. So you mentioned particularly origin, classification, and valuation. Why are these issues so important, and how can businesses get support when it comes to ensuring they have the right knowledge and skills needed to handle these topics?
Yeah, because those three things, origin, classification, and valuation, are basically what customs duties are built on. You get one wrong, and you could be overpaying, underpaying, or falling foul of the rules. And when it comes to the US, the rules are tough and the audits are getting tougher. So, in terms of the kind of support that businesses can look for would be things like getting their rules of origin reviewed, their classification, the commodity codes reviewed. So this is the time to review all these core foundational customs principles that you are implementing within your customs management.
And then in terms of how to get that support, I mean, there's a slide on screen now. So there's this new Navigator training bundle. Would you like to say anything more about that?
Yeah, we do have a training bundle. So the core customs issues on rules of origin, how to classify your good. You do need to revisit your commodity codes. Customs valuation, things that not many people are talking about, but customs valuation does play an important role. And I'm going to definitely discuss this in my training course on customs valuation, which we've just launched. Custom special procedures could provide an opportunity for you to think about these special procedures that do provide an opportunity to either defer or suspend goods during these times of uncertainty. So definitely a good training bundle for you to explore.
Terrific. Thank you, Garima. So, what other strategies? You mentioned that people might look for different suppliers, or people might look for different US partners as well if they're cheaper. So, what strategies can businesses look to adopt to mitigate the impact of these tariffs?
Well, there are quite a few, depending on how agile the business is. Some are looking at country of origin planning, so changing the production process or sourcing to qualify for better duty rates. Other are using tariff engineering, especially in sectors like consumer goods or auto parts, where small changes in design can actually reduce the tariff. There's also the more traditional tools that everyone has been talking about, like free trade agreements, customs procedures like duty drawback or bonded warehousing, and even, of course, renegotiating supply contracts. Let's look into the different aspects and how businesses can respond. Because while these tariffs are definitely disruptive, there are steps companies can take to protect themselves. Now, the first thing that I always say is start with origin. You really need to understand if your products qualify for any sort of preferential or non-preferential origin status in the case of US that could reduce or remove your tariffs. Now, this isn't just a checkbox exercise for sure. It means going deep into your supply chain, looking at where your materials come from, how the product is manufactured or processed, and whether it meets specific transformation rules under different kinds of rules of origin. Now, the second thing, which people often take as something that's very streamlined already and they don't need to review it or go back, is classification. So the tariff rate you pay depends heavily on how your product is classified under the harmonized system. And misclassification can be costly, we all know, not just in terms of overpaying, but also the risk of penalties or retrospective audits. And even the exemptions that US has come up with depends on where your product is classified, which commodity code you need to use. Now, the third most important thing is for businesses that are part of a global group is to make sure your intercompany pricing is solid. I know people are talking about moving profits here and there. Now, the value declared to the US customs for imports needs to reflect market reality. So if the price looks artificially low or inconsistent with transfer pricing rules, customs authorities may challenge it. And that can trigger extra duties, obviously, penalties in some cases, or even goods being held at the border. Now, another smart approach is to rethink your sourcing. If you can shift part of your supply chain to countries not impacted by these tariffs, or at least subject to lower US duties, that could make a big difference. And it's not always possible, especially in specialized sectors. I appreciate that. But where there's flexibility, it's definitely worth exploring. Now, the other element that I hear everyone say is free trade agreements. Think about the value that the free trade agreements are bringing to the table right now. The UK has signed over 70 FTAs globally, including with Japan, South Korea, Canada, and many more through the recent CPTPP. So if the US is becoming a difficult market to access, maybe it's time to look at diversifying your export markets and making the most of those FTAs. And lastly, and most importantly, stay alert. The trade landscape is moving pretty fast. Tariffs change, political decisions shift, and other countries may respond with their own tariffs. So it's important to keep your teams informed, make sure your custom brokers and freight partners are also in the loop, and have a strategy ready if further retaliatory action comes into play. So the overall message is, and I've been telling this to all my members and all my clients, don't be passive at this point. You do need a proactive, strategic approach to managing tariffs.
Thank you, Garima. I've got one more question for you, but before I do, just a quick note to everyone listening in. We're getting some great comments and questions coming in from the audience. Thank you, everyone, for writing in. We're not doing questions today for a few reasons. Firstly, we don't have Garima and Fergus here for too long. We've only got them for the half an hour due to their busyness, of course, at the moment. Also, some of these questions are very specific to company needs, and I think these are much better dealt with through some of the services which I know the team is posting in the chat and we're mentioning on screen as well. The team, there are various people from the Chartered Institute in the comments, so we will try to get back to as many things as we can on the comments, but we won't be doing questions live, but we will try to read out any kind of interesting experiences in a few moments' time. Garima, my last question for you is, we've had a few people contacting us about Northern Ireland, where due to post-Brexit arrangements, there could be some further complexities caused by Trump's tariffs. So could you say a bit about what the situation is in Northern Ireland?
Sure. Northern Ireland, we all know, is in a slightly unique position because of the post-Brexit arrangements. So goods can flow quite freely between Northern Ireland and the EU. But when it comes to the US, Northern Irish businesses are subject to the same US tariffs as the rest of the UK. That means if you're a manufacturer in Belfast exporting into the US, you're facing the same Section 301 or Section 232 tariffs as someone in Birmingham or London. But what makes it trickier is that some businesses in Northern Ireland are also importing EU origin components. And navigating dual systems when it comes to origin and customs paperwork can get a bit hectic and does need planning and understanding of regulations in both the jurisdictions. So the burden is often doubled because, you're working with two jurisdictions basically. And that's why you need that kind of support and clarity for trading within the Northern Ireland and exporting to the US. And we also offer help to Northern Ireland businesses. We do have our trainings, we do have our surgeries and advisory, especially focused on Northern Ireland.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Garima. There's a lot to digest there, but that's a great update from you on what businesses are faced with because of Trump's tariffs, but also some great advice on how firms can navigate this new period of uncertainty. But as you say, it remains turbulent times. Of course, you'll have seen through the slides and in the chat, the Institute is here to support you through these volatile times, whether that's through our International Trade Surgery service, on which you can ask experts like Garima for advice that's specific to your business's situation, or training to get up to speed on the compliance issues Garima has just mentioned, including the bundle of courses on key customs topics such as classification, origin, valuation, and customs special procedures. Or there's also tailored health checks on things like origin assessment, justification of value for your imports, or the verification of your commodity codes. If you do have any questions for our team of experts, please do get in touch. And I believe a link to the inquiry form is also being posted in the chat. And as I said a couple of moments ago, we've got quite a few people from the team listening in and posting in the comments as well. Now, let's have a quick look at some of the comments you have been sending in about how you've been impacted by the Trump trade war so far. So thank you, everyone, for writing in. This is an interesting one from Richard. It's quite a lot to read there, but 80% sales in the US, expecting tariffs of 145%, plus potentially another 25% due to Venezuela issues. We design and develop consumer electronic products in the UK, but have them manufactured in China and shipped from there to the US. Some of the wording of executive orders talks about shipments from China rather than products of China. So is transshipment via the UK likely to make a difference? I mean, we're not going too deep into questions, but Garima, just very quickly, I guess there's an issue here. Like if the UK companies will be doing lots of trade through countries like China, which have different rates effects. Is that something businesses need to be very much on top of, presumably?
Yeah, for sure. If you have a very diverse supply chain, the first thing that you need to understand is how do you determine your origin? And when we're talking about origin, it's not preferential rules of origin under any free trade agreement. We have to go by the non-preferential rules of origin in the United States because we don't have a free trade agreement with the United States. And then they apply a very typical concept of substantial transformation. So how do you meet the requirements of substantial transformation is something that you need to assess. And this is very subjective because the CBP decides it on a case-to-case basis.
Brilliant. Thank you, Garima. Thank you for that comment there as well. We've had James type in to say around 60% of products go to the US on DDP Incoterms. These are metal components for OEM automotive products. Thank you, James. Incoterms, always a really important part of this puzzle as well. So yeah, do check out our Incoterms support. Comment in from Alex. I believe substantial transformation would render the goods on a new non-preferential or possibly preferential origin. There are specific and non-specific rules depending on VHS code. I guess speaking to the point you were mentioning earlier, Garima, about the importance of knowing your codes and the requirements against each particular commodity code. Any other comments coming through? I believe. One more, maybe. Julie Brooks of Y Prime. We ship electronic devices made in China around the world for the purpose of collecting clinical trial data. Will be hit with tariffs if we return the items to our US warehouse. Another returning goods as well, but also so much that made in China aspect of it is really important. So Julie, thanks for typing in. I hope there's a resolution for you and that the tariffs don't affect you too much. Katrina as well. This will be our last comment. I think we want to get to Fergus. Katrina, working in the supply chain for a manufacturer of spectrometer items, the impact is likely to hit us with 10% on top of our already high value products. In one particular instance, we'll be hit with £25,000 of duties that would normally be duty free. Sorry to hear that, Katrina. Again, these are all examples of how seismic these tariffs are and how good businesses who shouldn't be caught up in things like geopolitics are being caught up in all of this. So yeah, very sorry to hear about that. But yeah, thank you everyone for typing in some great comments, some great experiences coming through. And let's not make today's event the end of the conversation. We're always keen to hear from you. The Chartered Institute indeed has a key role in acting as an interlocutor between government and industry on trade issues such as Trump's tariffs. We are currently running a survey to gather business sentiment about tariffs and what government support would be most valuable. A link will be posted in the chat shortly, so please do complete this survey if you'd like to have your voice heard in our dialogue with government. We really do want to hear from you. Now, on to the next section, and Garima, if you could just mute yourself, that'd be great as well. Thank you. So now, to talk about what might happen next regarding Trump's tariffs, I'm delighted to be joined by our EU and International Affairs Director, Fergus McReynolds, who is joining us all the way from Brussels. Indeed, good afternoon, Fergus. Now, Fergus, a lot has happened since Trump took office. A lot's happened since the reciprocal tariff announcement at the start of just this month, and a lot seems to have happened in the last few days as well. It's probably fair to say, though, that there's been a bit of a retreat from the most severe of Trump's tariffs, in part due to the collapses in the stock markets and the sell-off of US government bonds, which has obviously triggered some sort of response from the Trump administration. So my big question is, are we likely to see a return to the most extreme tariffs after the current 90-day pause? And are the 10% baseline tariffs, which are still a really significant change, as people in the comments have signaled, are they here to stay?
Thanks, Will, and good afternoon, everyone. I mean, I think this is really the billion-dollar question, isn't it? And I think the last week has shown us that it's very difficult to be certain about what President Trump is trying to achieve. I think, as Garima has already highlighted, important to say that while the 10% tariffs as the baseline for all countries is significant, we also shouldn't forget that there are sectors already facing much higher tariffs, with steel, aluminium, and the automotive sector, and with more to come for the automotive sector, unfortunately. But I think it's really important for us to try and understand what are the driving forces behind President Trump. And I think that will give us an indication of what is likely to come next. I think it's fairly fair to say that President Trump made no illusion of the fact that he saw tariffs as an important part of US trade policy and US foreign policy. It's a belief which he has firmly held for many years. But I think what's interesting is to look at some of the competing views of what tariffs are designed to achieve, and the responses which are coming from the total administration, the president and some of members of his cabinet. I think on the one hand, there is a view that tariffs are here to negotiate better deals for the US. I think that this is certainly the lesson that we learned from the first Trump administration. The one caution I would have on that is that we saw steel and aluminium tariffs levied on Canada and Mexico, and threats of other sectors being impacted under Trump's first term. And that was the trigger to bring those two parties to the table to negotiate a new trade agreement, the USMCA, which was concluded in Trump's first term. But actually, the conclusion of that agreement didn't get rid of the tariffs. So I think it's really important for us to consider that just coming to the table to negotiate isn't a guarantee that we're going to see the end of these tariffs as a mechanism that the Trump presidency is going to use in terms of international trade. The other two reasons behind tariffs, which have been widely reported, are looking to replace revenue, so bringing in tax for the US, and driving direct investment in the US, a return to manufacturing in many of these sectors which have seen decreases. I think one thing to caution in terms of the return of those manufacturing jobs is that, as we see across many different sectors, while globalization has had an impact on manufacturing jobs, the rollout of automation and new technologies is also a contributing factor. And there's no guarantee that if that trade came back, that you would see there's a return of the same number of jobs. So I think those things are all competing with each other. What I think it is fair to say is that Trump is being driven by market reaction, as you said, Will, and I think that is the strongest indicator of his next steps. What appears to be happening at the moment is that we're moving away perhaps from a blanket country or trading bloc specific approach, and perhaps looking at more strategic sectors. This tends to lean into the fact that they are trying to protect the US's trade in critical materials, as Garima has highlighted, some of the exemptions that they have introduced, and including this week exemptions on electronics from China as well. So we are starting to see a sector-by-sector approach. I think they are high tariffs for steel, aluminium, automotive, There's now an investigation for the pharmaceutical sector, and I think these are things which we have to expect and plan to be for the long term.
The UK has, according to some, gotten off relatively lightly with just 10% baseline tariffs, though, of course, as you say, higher tariffs on cars and steels. The EU as well, for at least 90 days, has seen its 20% tariff come down to 10% during the suspension period. What reaction might we now see from European capitals, including London?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the responses have changed as the situation has changed. I think it's if we look at the original response from the UK and the EU, they were very different. The UK made it very clear that they had no intention of putting countermeasures or retaliatory tariffs back on the US, and that their driving priority was to seek a trade deal with the US to try and reduce the even baseline 10%. The EU has taken a different approach, and they have yesterday, in fact, published the counterbalancing measures that they intend to leverage on the US if those higher rate tariffs come into force. They've committed, again, over the last couple of days, that those countermeasures will come into force if the US tariffs come into force at the end of those 90 days. And the EU has been relatively strategic in trying to target really key exports from predominantly Republican states in the US to try and put maximum political pressure on President Trump. They did pull away from leveraging tariffs on whiskey, on US bourbon, and I think that was driven by the risk that they would see a significant response from President Trump, as he indicated, targeting spirits and alcoholic beverages from the EU as well. Back to where I think the actual response is likely to be right now, and again, taking those as two separate approaches. From the UK perspective, continue to look at trade deals, but also looking at the wider implications. The UK announcing a suspension of some of the incoming tariffs to try and assist key sectors who are being impacted by the overall disruption in global trade that has responded or has been part of this. I think there's also been comments made in the commentary box of this call that there has been some indication that the US is keen to negotiate a trade deal with the UK. I think it's important for us to watch as that unfolds and whether there is a chance of finding a landing zone for the two parties to see that even baseline tariff reduced from 10%. From an EU perspective, they continue to see this 90 days as a negotiation window. The Chief Trade Commissioner, Shevchevich, is back from his third visit to Washington since Trump took power, and it's fair to say that they continue to offer a 0 for 0 tariff on goods. Again, the response from the Trump administration to the UK and the EU has been different. There's been a lot of warm words from the US, including today from JD Vance, the Vice President, that they're keen to do a trade deal with the UK. I don't think it's fair to say that the same appetite is there from an EU perspective, but they are keen to get them to the table. We will see a number of national leaders travel, I suspect, across the Atlantic over the course of the next 90 days to try and ensure that there is a resolution to this. But as I said in the response to the first question, I think we do have to plan for tariffs as being a mainstay of the Trump presidency, at least for the next 4 years.
Thank you, Fergus. I think businesses will need to get used to this, unfortunately. I was going to ask you a question about China, but we've run out of time, I'm afraid. So on that note, that's slightly somber note, I'm afraid, but we're going to have to start wrapping up. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Please feel free to continue the conversation. The team will continue to be active in the comments and in answering your questions. Let us know what you learned from this session and what tariff-related issues you'd like to know more about in any of our future events. To remind you all, you can book a 2-hour phone call with Garima or her team through our International Trade Surgery service. Just follow the QR code on screen. Here you can also find out more about our Tariff Navigator training bundle, through which you can gain some of the key custom skills mentioned earlier. You can also here discover how membership with the Chartered Institute can help you navigate this period of uncertainty with like-minded individuals in the trade sector, and access to exclusive resources, including the new Tariff Navigator Toolkit of useful guides and articles we've launched today. We will leave a slide on screen for a few moments as we depart. We very much hope to see you again soon on another webinar, but for now, thank you everyone. Goodbye.